This is just our general tithes and offerings. If you're not a part of this church, if you're new, if you're visiting, if you feel like I'm trying to twist your arm to give, I don't want you to give. Don't feel obliged to give. You don't need to give. But rather, what we want people to do is give out of the generosity of the heart. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to collect this offering, and then I'll get on with what I feel God's placed on my heart to talk about this morning. God, I thank you for the privilege that we have to give. And God, I thank you for the demonstration that you give to us of giving, Jesus, in that you gave us your Son, Jesus. You've given us your life, Father. You've given us your love. You've given us your grace. You've given us your mercy, Jesus. And I thank you that out of that, Jesus, that our hearts and our lives get transformed. So I pray that as we give, we're not giving under compulsion, Father, but rather we're giving because you're putting something on our heart to give. And I pray that as we give, that we are blessed and the seed that we give is blessed. In Jesus' name. And everybody said? All right, so as the ushers collect that, we are in the middle of a sermon series called Kingdom Builders. And the idea behind this is that we believe that God's got a mission for not just Epicentre Church or not just the Chukamoam, but God's got a mission for Australia, and God's got a mission globally as well. And so what we're talking about, or what we're going through for these, well, it's been 3 weeks now, and next week is the last week, is ultimately financially propelling God's mission of embracing people forward into the future. So, so if you perhaps haven't been following along in this series, you're like, why on earth are they doing this? Like taking out one offering, then they're asking for another offering, and they're doing that for an entire month. What's wrong with these people? It would be a great question. So my encouragement would be go back to week 1, which is the Sunday after Father's Day. And on that week, we actually break that apart. Why are we doing this? Why are we wanting to mobilize this? Why are we wanting to propel God's mission forward? Why are we asking you to give over and above your general tithes and offerings? Why are we doing that? What's the importance of that? I'm not going to go in that this morning, but I'd encourage you to do that. And so that was the first week. Then last week, what we talked about, what God is doing here with how we're connecting with people and we're embracing people and we're seeing life change come into people's hearts and people's minds. And the encouragement was that we give towards that as well. Before I get too far ahead of myself, on your seats you'll see cards called Kingdom Builders. My encouragement is that throughout this message, specifically this morning, you are prayerfully considering, you're allowing God to minister to you and encourage you and just challenge you about what, if, and how that you can be a part of this series. And honestly, my encouragement would be, whether you're a part of this church or not, that you're having that prayer. Can I be a part of this? Are you asking me to be a part of this? What I did say on the first week is that if you feel the church is just about taking your money, then I don't want you to give. Unless you feel compelled in your heart to give, then I'd ask you to give generously. So the idea of the series is we're taking up offerings for 3 different areas. One for what we're doing here in Chukamoama. Another offering for what's happening in Australia, and that money is going towards an organisation called Mission Australia, and that's next week. And then this week, the idea is that we're talking about International Justice Mission, and we're raising money to go towards that. And if you don't know what International Justice Mission is, it's about seeing slavery come to an end in our lifetime. If you someone like me, that when I was younger specifically, had heard about slavery but didn't realize there was much in existence of it, and perhaps you're here or you're watching online, you think, but is this really a big thing like today? Isn't that something that like it's kind of started taking place with Wilberforce and all those people, and it's just it's not a big deal anymore? Well, the reality is this, that when William Wilberforce started the movement of wanting to see slavery come to an end, slavery today is far bigger than what it was back then. And I think sometimes we've got this idea that this doesn't exist anymore, or it's confined, it doesn't really happen too often. But the reality is this, slave trading, people caught up in slavery, is bigger today than it ever has been. If we go to the first slide, Will. And there's some relatively shattering statistics. Over 40 million people globally are held in slavery. That means they're held against their will. And that looks like in multiple different areas, as far as that looks like slave labor camps, that looks like trafficking rings, that looks like they're held in people's homes, that looks like brides, people being flown over thinking that they're being married but discovering that they're just to be held as captives and forced to work. There's a whole host of things. Over 40 million people held in slavery. And perhaps a more shattering statistic, if we continue moving, is that 1 in 4 of them is a child. It's bad enough that over 40 million people are held captive in slavery, but on top of that, that 1 in 4 out of those is a child. And when I start hearing that, like, it hurts and it breaks my heart to start with this slavery in existence. But then I start thinking of that as far as I'm a father. Like, what if that was my kid? That's someone's daughter, that's someone's son that's held, that's stuck, that's held in captive in slavery. And we've got this idea sometimes that all of this is kind of pushed off to the ends of the earth, as far as this doesn't really happen here in this country, or the idea that slavery happens in those areas that are, my gosh, they're less well educated. They're third world countries, but I think it's the next one, but it could not be, and I could be jumping ahead. It's right. In Australia, it's estimated there are 15,000 people living in slavery. I don't know about you, but I at least often for a large portion of my life thought this sort of stuff doesn't happen in Western world. It only happens in the places that we deem sometimes ignorant. Slavery is alive and well in Australia, extremely thriving. Perhaps not on a massive scale like some other countries that we're going to look at in a minute, but it's still alive and well. And it looks like this, that you've got plenty of people, and we call them mail order brides, and that they connect with someone online. They end up flying over here thinking that they're going to be marrying someone, they're going to be having a better life than what they ever could have possibly dreamed for. And then they get here and their passport gets put under lock and key. And they said, you cost me so much money to get here, now you must pay it off. And often that comes with interest. And part of the other shattering thing that we have often in the Western world is that we believe that slavery often looks like chains and shackles and cages and slave camps and that sort of thing. But specifically when you move into places like Australia or in the Western world, people held in slavery sometimes are the person next to you at the supermarket that you don't realize. They walk freely. Generally, these people have this good relationship to some point where their oppressor trusts them enough to send them out. But they're too terrified to do anything about it. They're too terrified to step out. And this is one of the things we talked about last week, was that there's plenty of people that know a better reality exists, but don't believe that reality is anything that they can arrive at, step into, that is for them. And so this is part of the reason why people, specifically in the Western world, they struggle to step out of slavery, or in any part of the world. They know a better reality exists, but they don't believe that they can ever step into it. It's crazy. Over 40 million people globally, 1 in 4 is a child, 15,000 estimated in Australia, but the statistics keep going. If we move on to the next slide. Human trafficking generates about $150 billion a year, with 2/3 of that coming from the commercial sex exploitation. And that doesn't, I'll try to, I will be, I won't try to be, I'll try to be gentle with this. I know there's children in the room. That doesn't look like just people held in trafficking rings. That looks like the porn industry. For those of you, and I wouldn't be ignorant enough to think that everyone in here is perfect and never looks at pornography. And I'm not here, if that's you, I'm not here to judge you or anything like that, but some of the things that we don't think about is how our actions are actively propelling this industry on. So plenty of people have this idea, I'm just watching porn, it's harmless, it's not doing anything, it's not hurting anyone. And it's not to say that every actor or actress in that industry is held in captivity or against their will, but the problem is, you sitting in front of your computer or your phone or anything, you cannot differentiate, you cannot tell if that person is held against their will or not. So therefore, you cannot tell whether you are actively propelling that industry onwards. $150 billion, 40 million people worldwide. Continues on. A child in India, I know this is India, goes missing every 8 seconds. To put that into reality, that looks like in the course of this service, which goes for approximately an hour, probably run just over an hour this morning, there'll be 7.4 children go missing in India, and half of them will never be found. Half of them end up in slave camps. Half of them end up in sex trafficking rings. Half of them spend the rest of their lives in slavery. Half of them. Half of them are someone's children, someone's daughter, someone's son. These are like, I don't know about you, but as I've been specifically putting this message together as well as next week, I find this exceedingly confronting. Really confronting. I know it exists, But so often I tend to somewhat turn a blind eye, and perhaps you're the same. Like, I know this exists, but I'd rather like just push that out to my subconscious where I don't really recall it because some of this stuff is just too confronting. And that's me, if I'm just being transparent. And it's something that I believe what God wants us to do as a church is to be deliberate. Not just this church, but churches, is to be deliberate in we're meant to be the ones peddling the freedom forward. Seeing these people set free. We may not be able to do it physically, but there's other ways we can do it. And this is why we're doing Kingdom Builders, because we want to partner with God, with his mission of wanting to see people set free, whether it's emotionally, whether it's spiritually, or whether it's physically as well. We want to see people set free. There's this book called Ecclesiastes, and it's a part of the Bible. And it's gone down as far as, or it's been, the idea is written by this guy called Solomon. This guy called Solomon, to our tradition, Christian tradition, as well as Judaism, says that Solomon was at least one of the wisest, if not the most wise person that ever lived. And so this is him, Solomon, the wisest person that ever lived. He's penning, he's getting to the end of his life, and he's writing down his musings, his reflections, what he's taking note of. He's writing down his wisdom, like I'd like to think that we all do for our kids to pass on, coming towards the end of his life. So he's an older man now, writing down what he's seen, what he's thought, his musings, what God spoke to him about, different things like that. And so he says this in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 1. He says, I looked again. You know those times where it's like a double look? Where you see something out of the corner of your eye, or you notice something, and then you look away, and then you realize, no, that's something I need to look at again. Recently, I was talking, some of you know Jeff and Tanya Mitchell. I was talking with Jeff Mitchell, and he was sharing me with one of those stories. He was driving along the farm, down the road beside the farm, and he looked, and he saw something funny in the paddock, and then he looked back to the road and realized, I got to look again. And he looked back, and there was a cow with a 44-gallon drum stuck on its head, but it wasn't long ways, it was sideways somehow, so it looked like a hammerhead shark running around the paddock. And that was his look again moment. He's not here this morning, but I'd encourage you to chase him down. You need to hear the story because it is funny. But anyway, so that was his look again moment. I imagine you've had that. I've looked at something, I've noticed something, but my gosh, I've got to look back because there's something not right. Well, can I suggest that what we're talking about, should be that look again moment? I looked and I've seen something. I've seen the statistics on slavery. But I wonder how often we look, but then we don't ever bother to look back. It's staggering. It's confronting. It's in our face, but we won't look back. And Solomon says this. He says, I looked again, and this is what I saw. I saw people being mistreated everywhere on the earth. I think what we end up doing, we hear statistics and we read statistics and we know statistics and we've got an idea about the problems and the struggles when it comes to slavery and its size and everything. But often I think what we do is we look, but we refuse to look again because it's too confronting, it's too in our face. And I think what God's trying to highlight here and what God's trying to call out to us is, hey, I know you've already looked, but here's my encouragement. I want you to look again. I want you to keep looking because I'm putting something in front of you that I actively want you to step out and do something about. Solomon goes on. He says they were crying as far as people held in captivity. They're not wanting to be there. They're not enjoying it. They're crying. They're upset. He says they were crying. But there was no one there to offer them comfort. So many people live in that specifically. We've got over 40 million people living in the reality where they're crying, they're impoverished, they're being beaten, their life's falling apart, and there's no one there to offer them comfort. How often will we look? How often will we choose to look away because it's too confronting? And then he finishes with this. There's no one there to offer them comfort. And those who mistreated them were powerful. Back to that thing that I was talking about before, as far as you got people in the Western world that they'll go and shop amongst everyone. They're by themselves, but they won't ever step into freedom because they don't believe they can attain it. The reality is this: for the more than 40 million people held in captivity, in slavery, they believe that their oppressor is more powerful than them because their oppressors are really, really good at breaking them down emotionally, specifically. And so they believe that they are less powerful and their oppressor is more powerful. But one of the things I think we need to be deliberate when we look again is that there's something that we should take note of. As much as the figures seem staggering and too powerful for us to combat and do anything, but we've got a God that can do a whole lot more. And the figures and all of that seem staggering, but then you got places like International Justice Mission that are more powerful than the oppressors, that are mobilizing, that are bringing people together in groups together that can actively step out and set people free and see actual lives change. And I want to go through a couple of those, or just a couple of those stories. And so I've got a story here, and if you put her face up, this is Gary. And I'm going to read through part of her story, and then we're going to watch her share her story as well. I couldn't choose on one or the other because one edits some and vice versa, and I just thought both parts are too important not to hear. So when Gary and her husband Kuma were expecting their second child, they needed money for her medical expenses. He was working in a woodcutting business and a brick kiln and asked his boss to borrow 25,000 rupees, which is about 515 Australian dollars, for Gary's medical expenses. The owner refused to accept any payment other than manual labor. So the young couple agreed to work at the business until they eliminated their debt. There's a couple of slides to run through with this, Will. Yeah. That's when the nightmare and forced labor slavery began. The boss was cruel, verbally and physically abusing them. When Gary tried speaking up for better conditions, she was tied up in a cowshed for an entire day and was forced to watch her husband be beaten raw. Things came to breaking point when a 2-year-old daughter was beaten with a branch for playing with a water tap. Gary screamed at the owner, who retaliated by kicking her down and stomping on her stomach. Because of the injuries, Gary couldn't stand up for days. She was hopeless. "No one stood up for me," she cried, "and no one will." While Gary was still recovering, and nearly 10 years after she and her family were first enslaved, 10 years after they were first enslaved, IJM made contact with the families in her facility while investigating allegations of slavery there, and then quickly mobilized after learning about her condition. We helped, as far as this is IJM saying, IJM helped government officials and police rescue her and 22 others a few days later. The laborers were relieved to be free from the owner, but they were still too terrified to tell the officials about the abuse that they suffered. Only Gary spoke up. She encouraged them to tell the police everything the owner had done to them, saying, "We've waited enough. We've had enough. It's time to tell the truth." Today, Gary's energy is focused on her children's future, and with IJM's help, they are each studying in school or in vocational training programs, enjoying their lives in freedom. This is a video from her.
எனக்காக எந்த எதிர்காலமும் நினைவும் இல்லை. என் பிள்ளைங்களோட நினைவு தான் எனக்கு இருக்கு. அத்தைங்களை பாதுகாப்பாம சீரழிஞ்சு உருவங்க வந்து தாய் கிடையாது. அப்படி தான் நாங்கள் நினச்சோம். சாதாரணமாக தான் நாங்கள் நினச்சோம். கொத்தடிமையாக போய் வேலை செய்கிற மாரி எங்களுக்கு தெரியல. சாதாரணமாக தான் நாங்கள் செஞ்சோம். அதுக்கு சரின்னு சொல்லிவிட்டு நான் போனேன். கூட வேலைக்கு போயிட்டு எல்லா பொம்பளைங்களும் வேலை செய்கிறாங்களேன்னு சொல்லிட்டு எல்லா பொம்பளைங்க கூட நானும் கலந்து போய் வேலை செஞ்சேன். வேலை செய்யும்போது எனக்கு பக்கத்தில் இருக்கிறவங்க சொன்னாங்க, "நீ ஏன் வேலைக்கு வந்த, எதுக்கு வந்த, இந்த ஆள் மோசமானு நினச்சின்னு" என்கிட்ட சொன்னாங்க. அந்த நேரம் நான் நம்பலை. நீ வேலை வாங்குறதா இருந்தாலும் நியாயமாக வேலை வாங்கிக்கோ, நியாயமாக கூலி கொடு. அவங்கள வந்து ஒரு பள்ளம் சொல்லக்கூடாது, எதுவும் கேட்கக்கூடாது. என்னை பாதுகாத்தது யாருமே இல்லை. அந்த டைமில் என்னை காப்பாற்றவும் யாரும் இல்லை. அந்த ஆள் அந்த வேலை செய்யும்போது ஐயோ நம்மளை யாருன்னா காப்பாற்ற மாட்டாங்களா, செய்ய மாட்டாங்களா, கடவுளெல்லாம் நிறைய வேண்டியிருக்கேன் நான். அப்பே என் பிள்ளைங்க என்னன்னு ஓடியாந்துச்சு. அந்த ஆள் தாம்மா நீ வேலைக்கு வரலன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அந்த ஆள் தான் என்னை அடித்தான். அந்த கோவத்தோடு போயிட்டு நான் அந்த ஆள் சண்டை போட்டேன். ஏன் என் பிள்ளைங்கள அடிக்கிறேன், எதுக்காக அடிக்கிறேன்? என்னை முன்ன விட்டுட்டு அந்த ஆள் பின்னாடி வந்து கட்டையால் அடிச்சு வேதனையாயிடுச்சு. எனக்கு இப்போ அந்த தைரியம் எப்படி வந்துச்சுன்னா, அந்த ஆள் அடிச்சதுனால தைரியம் வந்துச்சு. எந்த தவறும் இல்லாமல் அந்த ஆள் மேலே தப்பு இருந்தால் நம்ம கேட்கலாம். நியாயம் நம்ம பக்கம் இருக்குது. எதனால நம்பினோன்னா, அவங்க வந்து ஒரு வாட்டி நாங்கள் ஃபோன் பண்ணும்போது எங்களை வந்து பார்த்தாங்க. எனக்கு தைரியம் சொன்னாங்க, நீ பயப்படாத கௌரி, உனக்கு பக்கத்தோடனே நாங்கள் இருக்கோம், நாங்கள் கண்டிப்பாக உன்னை காப்பாற்றுவோம். வந்து என்னை காப்பாற்றலைன்னா இன்றைக்கி நான் எங்கள் பிள்ளைங்களுக்கு தாயாக இருந்திருக்க மாட்டேன். ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கிறேன். ஏன்னா என் பிள்ளைங்க படிக்கிறதுனால எனக்கு இன்னும் ரொம்ப சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கு. நான் 8 கற்றுக்குதுங்க, நல்லா சந்தோஷமாக இருக்குதுங்க. எதனா ஒரு கம்பெனி வேலைக்கு போகணும், எதனா ஒரு டாக்டர் ஆகணும், எதனா டீச்சர் ஆகணும். அதுக்கு நல்லா படித்து நல்லா நெகலில் தான் வேலை செய்யணுமா தவிர என்னமாரி சுதந்திரம்னா நிம்மதியாக சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கேன். 4 பேர்கிட்ட நல்லா பேசுகிறேன், சிரிக்கிறேன், ஆடம்பரமாக இருக்கேன், பிள்ளைங்களை விட்டுட்டு சந்தோஷமாக இருக்கிறேன். ஒரு தாயாக இருக்கிறதுனால எனக்கு ரொம்ப பெருமையாக இருக்குது.
I wonder if sometimes we never take that second look because it seems too big. Over 40 million people worldwide. 1 in 4 is a child. $150 billion. 15,000 approximately in Australia. I think sometimes we don't take that second look that causes us to action to do something because we think it's too big for me to be able to do anything about it to make a real difference. So I think we often, because of that, we tend to just keep focusing, keep driving, keep heading where we're going. It's too confronting. I can't do anything about it. I'm going to leave it as it is. IJM makes this really simple for us. Really, really simple. $25 on the first slide. Next slide, whatever it is. $25 teaches a rescued family how to live. You specifically with stories like Gary's, and then we've got another story that I'll show you in a minute. People like this, after they've been in this, they need to, like 10 years living in that space, 10 years being beaten, 10 years being emotionally destroyed, 10 years being emotionally pulled apart. People like that need to be re-educated on how to live afterwards, specifically with what to say no to, what not to enter into, what not to do, there's a whole host of stuff, and it costs $25 to educate a family. So that might be a family of 4 or 5, I don't know. But one of the things that I really like about that, it costs $25 to educate that family on how to live after being rescued, but that continues on. As far as those kids then teach their kids, this is how you stay free, this is what you don't do, this is where you don't go, these are the choices that you make, then this will help keep you out of freedom, and they'll talk to their neighbours and they'll do this, and so it might look like you're just spending money, $25 on one family of 5, but soon 5 becomes 10, 15, 20, and it continues on, and then all of a sudden you've got generations that keep living in freedom because of the education that they were given them by someone's simple $25 investment. What I really like about that is that most of us blow $25 on coffee every week, or junk food, or like little items here and there. $25 isn't much, but it makes a huge difference. The next slide says this, $150. $150 is all it takes to mobilize an operation, a rescue operation. Just like what Gary was talking about, what we're reading about, IJM going and setting her and her family free, and the 22 others. $150 is all it takes to mobilize that. And I love this sort of stuff because I look at them like this becomes something that we can easily achieve. Imagine if all of us here combined said, you know what, I want to mobilize as many rescue operations as I can, so I'm going to give $150 this year, and then every single one of us did it. For some of us, it would be a stretch. For others, it wouldn't be a stretch at all. But what it would do would make a real difference in someone's life. Then you've got other people that give $25 that facilitates the education that keeps them free. And then the last one is this, $120 builds a simple thatched hut for people to live in after being rescued. Because for some of these people, they that's their only dwelling, that's their only place where they're being held, and they step out of that and they've got nowhere to go, they've got no roof. $120 gets some shelter, gets them somewhere where they can live. And again, it's not a stretch. For some of us, it might be some kind of a stretch, but for most of us, it's not a stretch. It just may look like our groceries aren't as extravagant one week, but it makes a real difference in someone's life. And so from something that we look at and we think, I can't do much, it's too big, over 40 million across the globe, 1 in 4 being a child, approximately 15,000 in Australia, $150 billion. That's too big for me. I can't actively do something. But when you look at it, hey, if you sacrifice coffee for a week, you can teach some people how to live in freedom. If you sacrifice your coffee, your groceries, potentially to some regard, you can fund a rescue operation, or you can build a thatched hut, or you can do something. It doesn't take much to actively do something. Today is what we're going through, this thing called Kingdom Builders, but IJM calls today Freedom Sunday. The idea behind Freedom Sunday is it is churches across Australia gather together today. So the Baptist Church here in Echuca is doing it as well. That we're gathering together to raise money together to see slavery come to an end in our lifetime. The goal for IJM this year is to raise $100,000 in Australia. What really excites me about these things is the statistics are staggering. But if we actively gave in accordance to the harvest that we're expecting to see, like we talked about in week 1, I believe we could start seeing those numbers greatly diminish. If the church as a whole actively started giving according to the harvest they're expecting, sowing seed according to the harvest they're expecting to see, I believe we can start seeing a diminishing of those numbers. And I'd like to see that if we gave, believing that God was going to do something, believing that groups are going to be mobilized, believing that those numbers were going to be diminished, and we gave, and according to that, like we talked about in week 1, I believe what would happen is, in say in 2-3 years' time, when we come back and we do it, this is a yearly thing we've been doing, and we come back in 2 to 3 years' time, we see the figures again, and now it's down to 35 million people globally. It's still huge, it's still massive, it still seems an impossible task, but the numbers are diminishing. And I'd like to think if churches kept getting on it and kept doing it, and we as a church actively kept realizing that it's part of our calling to have people step into freedom, I believe that in 10 years' time we could see a massive reduction in those numbers. And I believe that it is possible that in our lifetime we can see those numbers perhaps come to 0. So my encouragement is this morning, and I know that unashamedly I am asking for money, not for what we're doing here, but I'm asking for money to see people set free from the slavery that they're in. I'm going to ask you to watch one more video, and then we'll dismiss.
You're working 14, 18-hour days with very little sleep, no freedom. Dignity is taken away from them, and that's something nobody should have to endure. We had a number of years ago, 2 of the bond laborers escaped from a facility, and they were tracked down by the owners of the facility and brought back, and as a punishment for what they had done, their hands were chopped off.
We would go to the government officers and we'd say, sir, there is a bonded labor case. And almost always the response was, there is no bonded labor in my area. What are you talking?
How much? 30? Yeah, I'm afraid.
Ruchira, there's a girl who's very afraid. Almost unable to walk.
This is Kumar. He was abandoned by his mother, and his father was suddenly killed. Orphaned and alone, he was accountable for his parents' debts. And at just 7 years old, he was forced into slavery.
வேலை செய்யும் போது ஒரு நாள் சார் ரொம்ப கையெல்லாம் ரொம்ப வெளியெடுத்துக்கிச்சு சார் ரொம்ப எரியுற மாதிரி ரொம்ப கொள்ளு தூக்க கூட ஆகமாயிருச்சு சார்.
Kumar remembers a day where he was so ill he couldn't get out of bed. Immediately, his owner came looking for him.
அவங்க வந்து ஏன்டா வேலைக்கு போகலான்னு கேட்டாங்க. நான் சார் உடம்பு சரியில்லைன்னு சொன்னேன். அப்புறம் அவங்க வந்து கூட்டிட்டு போனாங்க, ரூமுக்கு கூட்டு போனாங்க. அப்புறம் சூக்காலே வச்சுட்டாங்க.
ಗೊತ್ತು ಅವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಇವತ್ತು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಒದಗಿ ತಿಂದಿರೋದು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ತಿಂದಿರೋದು ಅದನ್ನಿಂಕ
வேற நம்ம அப்பா அம்மா இருந்தால் நம்மளுக்கு நல்லா இருக்கும் அப்படின்னு நினச்சேன்.
Kumar was trapped by debt and a slave owner who beat him continuously. He, like so many, had no remaining hope for a way out. IJM discovered the horrific conditions in the brick factory where Kumar and others were being forced to work against their will. And, based on their undercover video evidence, local government authorities and police came alongside IJM to conduct a rescue operation.
The more and more we are doing these rescues, people are getting aware that people are being abused. There is bonded labor, there is trafficking. Also, the law is going to take its course as well as perpetrators go behind.
When the team arrived in the morning and entered the brick factory, 15 men, women, and children were rescued and given their freedom back. Then, they were each given a certificate to prove that they no longer owe any debts to their former owner. And one was for Kumar. After being rescued, IJM placed Kumar in their aftercare program to heal.
You'd ask him a question anytime, no matter what, and he would say, the one thing I want to do, sir, is I want to study. He was clear about that.
And then, they enrolled him in school for the first time. Today, he is studying to be a social worker, to help those still suffering like he did.
இதை காட்டியிருந்தோன்னா அவர் உண்மையாகவே சந்தோஷப்பட்டிருப்பார். அவர் அன்பாக இருந்தோம் நான் இந்த அளவுக்கு இதை காட்டியிருந்தோன்னா.
And what we do at IJM is we go look for that lost sheep, that girl that's being abused, that widow who's been run out of her home. And we will search for her until we find her. That's how our Father has loved us. That's how we are called to love others. Not to search for them until we've satisfied ourselves. Not to search for them until it gets really hard. But to go after them until we find them, to be relentless in our love.
On your seats, there's these cards called Kingdom Builder cards. And there's options on there on how you can give and what you want to give and so forth. This is what I'm going to encourage you to do. I don't want you to give because I'm asking you to give. I want you to give because God's placed it on your heart to give. So my encouragement is, if God's placed that on your heart to give, fill out the cards. And up the back as you head out, there'll be someone there with one of the offering bags, and you can pop it in there. If you want to give cash, you can pop it in there. If you want to give by card, there's FPOS facilities up at the info hub. Narelle can help you with that. But my encouragement is that you give because God's placed it on your heart to give. And my prayer is that as we come together as a church and that we give, that the seed that we give reflects the harvest that we're expecting to see over these next 12 months. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to encourage you to give and then head out and grab a tea or a coffee. God, I thank you for the work that you're doing, Jesus, through organizations like IJM, Father. And just with the two stories that we listened to, Father, from Gowrie and Kumar, and some of the pain that they'd been through and some of the situations that they'd been in, Father, and then the freedom that they've experienced as people heard a call from you, Jesus, and responded to that call and did something, Father, and went and set them free, Father. I thank you for the people that have partnered with IJM physically in working with them, as well as partnered with them financially by giving to them to see that freedom continue to move forward. I want to say thank you for that, Jesus, and I want to pray for over these next 12 months, Jesus, as we continue on with Freedom Sunday and seeing slavery come to an end, God. I pray that as we give as a church and as churches across Australia give, Father, that we can see a real difference be made in the lives of people like Gowrie and Kumar as we give. In Jesus' name, amen. Here's my encouragement. Fill out the cards with what you feel God's placing on your heart, if you feel God's placing something on your heart to give. There'll be someone up the back with one of the offering bags. Otherwise, put it in there, FBOS facilities. Don't rush off, head out, grab a tea or coffee, connect with someone, have a chat. We'd love to get to know you, love to catch up with you. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for Mission Australia.